Hi, I'm Pete, and welcome to Just a Few Acres Farm. I got a couple rainy days in a row here. I love the rain this time of year, and I also love that it lets me get inside and work on the MD. I got a million little things to finish on this engine before I can paint it. I got to install the rocker arms and the valve cover. I've got to pre-paint around the injectors before I put the injectors in. I've started masking everything off, and I'm really a stickler for getting paint on everything as far as not having hidden areas on the engine that don't get painted. So I wait to install a lot of stuff till I have this sort of bare block painted. Before I put the rocker arms on, I've got to take this off to put a new seal in here that I got today from Bates. And before I do it this time, I'm going to put a rag on the push rod hole so I don't lose that little nut down in there again and waste a lot of time looking for it. There we go. Here's that little star washer I lost the last time around. We'll just pull this out. There's a seal right here. Originally I was going to leave it, but then as I thought about it, I thought, well, it's catching a lot of oil, it's draining off the rocker arm, so do a good job, I better replace it. Hopefully I can punch it out from the back side. I thought this was kind of interesting. So this seal sits more toward the front of this hole, this new one I'm going to put in. And there's a drain hole in the back for any oil that accumulates behind the seal to drain back in, which that's a pretty good little piece of detail there to keep this seal from leaking. I'll use my fancy seal driver to put it in, also known as 11/16 inch socket. Now we can put this back together. Maybe. There we go. Now I can set this rocker arm assembly in place, and if you didn't see it in an earlier video last winter, I took this all apart, cleaned it up, and pre-lubed it, so it's ready to go. This is a bit more complicated than a gas assembly because of the third valve shaft that's down here with the actuators on it. Let me show you what I'm trying to line up over here. See, this shaft here has the pedals that push down on the compression release valves, and it's spring loaded. The shaft is on the ends here, there's springs, and this little ball needs to sit in the socket, and it's just got a little safety wire on it in case something happens and it comes loose. It's got to sit in the other ball socket here and in this socket here. Not an easy thing to get all lined up. There. Well, I got a problem here. This stud is stripped. The threads are stripped on it, so luckily I don't think I got to pull everything apart to get it out, but I'm going to have to make a new stud. The more I work on this engine, the more I come to believe that it has been apart many times for overhauls. I grabbed a bolt from my bolt boxes here, and the thread on the one end is a little bit too long, so I'm going to have to cut that off. It's coarse thread. And then on the other end, what I'll do is I'll cut the bolt off and thread it fine here to make a new stud out of this bolt. Before I cut the end of this off, I'm going to slip a die on here and turn it down so that I can re-thread it after I cut the end of it off. Then file the end of it. I usually taper the edges of it too a little bit. Now I can take the die off and I'll re-thread the end as it comes off where I messed up the threads with the cutoff wheel. So here we have the first end of the stud, and now we got to do the other end. So we'll cut this to length. File it off. Now I'm going to put a fine thread die on it and cut the threads. And here's my new stud. There's the old stud. I made it a touch longer than the old one because they were a little bit short, but this method Sure does save a lot of screwing around trying to search out new studs of the same configuration as ones that were bad. Just make them yourself. Problem solved. Next, I have to adjust the valve lash or the tappet gap on the rocker arms, and I took all the spark plugs out so the engine doesn't have compression and turns easily. And I have to keep the third valve open, the compression release valve, and I just use an old screwdriver to do that. Now with that open, I can feel compression air coming out of each spark plug hole as I turn the engine, so I can tell when I'm on the compression stroke when both valves are closed. And when I get to the top of that stroke, then I can start setting the valves. What I'm doing now is I'm turning the engine around and watching the valves so that I know that I'm on the compression stroke, top dead center of the compression stroke, and I want to set my valves there. And I'm looking at number 1 piston first. And I know that top dead center is when the key on the front of my crankshaft is at the top. Now I've got both of my valves closed right now. So I turn it around so I know I'm on the compression stroke. Get the keys to the top of the crankshaft. And so now for number 1, I'm at the point where I want to adjust the valve lash. You've probably seen this done a million times on YouTube. I'm just adjusting using a 17 thousandths feeler gauge, which is the spec, and just tightening it down till I get a little slight pull out of it, and then it's adjusted, and then tighten it up. I'm going to have to go through and do all this all over again after I first run the engine, because I'm going to have to pull the rocker arms off to retorque the head nuts, and then I'm going to have to set the valve lash again. There's a zillion different ways to order how you do it, and everybody does it differently. This is the way I do it. After I've found top dead center compression for number 1, I just follow the firing order. So the firing order on this engine is 1, 3, 4, 2. So I know if I turn the crank 180 degrees, number 3 is going to be on top dead center of compression stroke, and I can follow 180 degrees after for 4, and then 180 degrees for 2. It makes it simple to know where you're at instead of trying to find top dead center compression each time you go through. So I'll turn this crank 180 degrees, and that should bring me to top dead center compression of number 3. There. Valve closed, valve closed. Oh, the things I get myself into. So I pulled the spark plugs out thinking, oh, I'm going to feel air coming out of the holes when I reach the compression stroke. I forgot the injectors aren't installed yet on the other side. I'm like, why is there no air coming out of the spark plug hole in the compression stroke? Because it's coming out over there. But I'm confident because I timed the pulley in the last video and found where top dead center on the pulley, looked to see where the keys were in relationship to that, watched the valves, that I've set these properly. I know that the keys on top of the crankshaft are straight up at top dead center, and I watch the valve action to show when I'm coming onto the compression stroke. So I'm confident I've set all of these right. Next, I can install the valve cover, starting with the valve cover gasket. And once again, everybody likes to do these differently. What I do is I put gasket sealer on one side, on the bottom side of it, and I adhere it to the head like this, and then I don't use any sealer on the top of it so that when I pull the valve cover it's easily pulled. The reason I got in the habit of doing it this way is quite a few heads on the Farmalls have a flush top, so the gasket can act as a little extra dam for any oil that's seeping out, and if the bottom of the gasket's sealed, it helps that from seeping. And then I keep the top unsealed to access the valves to adjust them when I need to. This is a momentous occasion right here. How many months I've been working on this? It's April, close to 4 months, is that right? 4 months. Finally get the engine sealed up, and I call it sealed up when you just have accessories left to go on it. And that's a big day. It's another day, and before I finished last night, I took a wire brush on the grinder and cleaned all of the rust and everything off the rest of the head and the block, and I pre-painted under where the injectors are going in, and now I'm going to install the injectors. Before I install it, I'm going to take these studs out. I just put them in for painting, and I'm going to chase out the threads on these and then reinstall the studs. Well, this is interesting. This hole appears to have part of a broken off stud in it, but it's down deep in the hole such that I have enough threads to put a new stud in. And I can imagine what happened. I think probably when this block cracked and they went to weld it up, they had to take out this stud to get the welder in there right. And when they removed the stud, they probably broke off the end of it. I remember when I tore this engine apart, this hole had a bolt in it instead of a stud holding the injector on, so now I know why. I double nutted these to turn them on instead of using the stud extractors because I don't want to scratch up my new paint. But it takes a lot longer to do it that way. I'll go ahead and take this wadding out of here that I put in to protect it from the paint and dust. What I'm going to do next is test fit one of these injectors. I'll actually install it and make sure I got the stud lengths right. And I've got new sealing washers that I got from Bates, and I had to get three used pre-cups in good condition from Bates because of the ones I had to weld on to get out. These are marked with an up mark, and that goes up to get this passageway here in the correct orientation with respect to the engine. So the first thing that goes in is a sealing washer, and then the pre-cup goes in on top of that, and then another sealing washer. Central Injection put new O-rings on the injectors when they redid them, and these are a dust shield as it goes down the bore, but when I slide the injector down the bore, this doesn't even make contact. It's so much thinner than the original. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these off and put the originals back on. The originals are still nice and pliable and kept their round shape, so I think that's a better choice. See how much bigger it is? So this just slides down in. Get that O-ring seated in there. There we go. This assembly is so funky. The studs stick up, and I wanted to make sure that I can still get the line on without it interfering with the stud, and it looks like I just can, so that's good. I'm glad I test fit this injector because now I know these studs need to seat down in just as far as they'll go to clear the pipe end of the injector. The Blue Ribbon service manual says that these are to be tightened to 20 foot-pounds. I'm using an inch-pound wrench, so it's 240 inch-pounds. And I can torque this one without any problem. There. But I can't get a torque wrench or any kind of socket wrench on this other one, so what I do to get it close is I check how tight this one feels by hand, and then I tighten to the same by hand feel tightness, hand torque, I guess, till it feels the same. Now this one's going to be the bugger, and I think I'm going to have to shorten this stud. This is a new stud that I made, so I'm going to use that one in the hole, and if I got to cut it down, no big deal. I turned this stud in as far as it would go, and indeed it is high by a little bit. If I take a measurement, this one, which fit in nicely, is 1 7/16 inch above the head. This one is 1 11/16, so I got to take a 1/4 inch off of the coarse thread end of this to get it to seat in to the right level. I did the same thing to cut off this stud. I slipped a die on it, cut the end off. It's not really square, but it'll be good enough. And then I took the die off to rethread the end where I had cut. Now it should be the right length. It's got plenty of thread still to grab in and hold tight. Next, I have to clean up all these fasteners for accessories that go on the engine so that I can paint them at the same time as I paint the engine block. And it's the same old thing. I'll put each bolt on a grinder and in the parts washer and clean it off. The engine's ready for painting now. I cleaned up all the bolts of the things that mount directly to it and screwed them in a little bit so I can paint them in place. Here's the other side with everything masked off. The intake ports here, I put the studs in the nuts so that I can paint them in place. And I'll blow it off with some compressed air. Get all the dust off. And wipe it down with some lacquer thinner to get any oil residue off and any remaining dust. You see, it comes off, there's dirt. Mask off the rear end a little bit here. Drape some sheets on here. One coat of primer on the engine. Well, here she is with 2 coats of paint. Looks like a different engine. Show you around the other side. All shiny. I've been waiting to get to this point for a long time. This is definitely not about instant gratification doing these old tractors, and this one's been especially hard. Setbacks all along the way. I'm hoping now I'm on the downhill side. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.